Well, I can. Is that on? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. All right. I got a big voice. I'll just talk. So, I have to say that our Father would certainly be humbled to see how many of you showed up here today. We are humbled as well. And as you can imagine, talking at your Father's service is liable to be a tearjerker. But here's what I do know. I got a lot of friends here. And I have a lot of climbing friends here as well. And one thing that climbers know, when you tie into a rope to one another, you are literally putting your lives, you are trusting your lives in each other. That person holding on to the brake hand of that rope, holding on to that rope while the other person is climbing, that person we call him the belayer, that brake hand can never leave the rope. It's not like the climber can go up there and all of a sudden he falls and the belayer's, oh wait, can you fall again? Sorry, I wasn't ready for that. You don't have that option. That brake hand's always on the rope. So, I'm going to ask for everybody here, especially the climbers in the room, but all of you to give me a figurative belay up here. So, for all of you who know the answer to this, I would like you to respond in a nice loud voice for me. Is my belay on?
Yes. On belay.
On belay.
Let's try that again. Is my belay on?
On belay.
On belay.
Climbing. Climb on. Thank you. So, if I do break down from time to time, we're all friends. Please don't feel uncomfortable about it. Most of you know our Father through various interests and activities. Some of you know him through the Model A Ford Club, through his love of Model A's. Some of you know him through the outdoors, your skiers, your hikers, your fly fishermen, your climbers. Some of you know him through church circles. He was very active in the church here, of course, and down in the Methodist Church in Santa Monica. And some of you know him through music circles, too. There's a few musicians here who know him as fellow musicians. Some of you know him through his performances with his band that he co-founded for the Love of Swing. They played over at Whiskey Creek for many, many years. And if I forget to mention this later, we brought CDs of that band for all of you here to give out, a live performance that they gave here once. And some of you were fans of his radio show that he did for so many years in this town. And through those various slices of his life that you experienced, we, of course, as the family, we experienced a lot of those various slices of life. And so I'm just going to share with you for a few minutes about what that was like looking through the lens as Dad. So, when it came to music, as you know, it was a big part of his life. He learned how to play piano in elementary school, and by high school he got pretty darn good. And he heard that there was a small jazz band that was looking for a piano player, a 12-piece swing band. And this is during the war years, and they needed a piano player. He went and auditioned. And the way he told the story, he says there's two of them that went and auditioned, and he was the first one, and they never brought up the second guy. And one of the things that they learned pretty quick is that he had a really good left hand. And what does that mean? Well, if you're in the 1940s, and some of you in this room will remember that in person, I know, he could play the boogie woogie. He could walk his left hand up and down, lower into that keyboard, and start rolling off solo licks with his right hand. And he got so good at it that when they'd be performing gigs, they played senior proms. Bands were hard to come by in those days, and there weren't DJs, anything like that. So you had these bands that played these proms, military events and such, and they would literally, they'd get going, and the energy would get going, and the people were out there dancing and all that, and the band leader would look over at John, and he would go, and as his solo would finish up, he'd go, and that meant, go take another one. And he'd finish that one, and he'd go take another one. I had this vision that maybe one day we'll be able to fulfill it of playing a little medley of tunes with Pete Watercott on the fiddle, and being able to look over at Pete and, as a tribute to him, just say, come on, take a couple extra solos for us. Maybe we'll do that someday. But the other thing about those high school years is that he got an F in typing. Believe it or not. And I'm not telling you anything he wouldn't have told you himself. But after high school, he got a job with Merrill Lynch as a board marker. And what that meant was, back then they didn't have ticker tapes running the stock exchange. They hired high school kids who got up and they wrote the quotes on chalkboards. And at the end of that summer, he was offered a job as their teletype operator. They said that their teletype operator just gave 2 weeks' notice, and that was to type the orders back to New York, all the stock orders back to Wall Street. And he says, what does it pay? They said, $70 a week. Really? You just have to be able to type 60 words a minute with no mistakes. So one of the first lessons we learned is incentive and having a purpose. He enrolled in night school, and in 2 weeks, he was typing at least 60 words a minute with no mistakes. Yeah. And it was a testament to his positive thinking overall, and I know many of you in many other circles have experience with him. And so he did that job for a while until he got drafted into the Korean War in 1949. And he'd stay in there through and go through boot camp, and sometime in 1950 he got discharged, honorably discharged, but then called right back in September of 1950 and stayed through 1952. He was a sergeant major, and during those years, those skills I just mentioned became very useful. For one, he knew how to type now. So he became a desk sergeant, typing up orders to send people back over to Korea to go fight. And the other thing that he did awfully well is he played jazz piano. And he played in the officers club every night. And they weren't about to see their jazz piano playing sergeant leave from that officers club playing that piano. And as anybody knows who was blessed to hear him play, what a blessing it was. And he played that throughout his life, not only for the officers there, but wherever he went, right through here in Bishop. He'd go over to the care center and play there. He was playing at Sterling Heights during mealtime when he was living there, and of course his band and all of that, and various impromptu gigs he would do. Incidentally, one of those people he played with is here in the audience, Bob Wagner. You can give us a wave there. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. As growing up around him, when it came time for Dad to have talks about what we were going to do with ourselves in this world, he'd never give us any specific direction about telling us to be this or that. He always told us, do what you love to do, because that is what's going to make you happy. And of course, we've heard that saying, well, if you love what you do, you never work another day in your life, blah, blah, blah. He lived that in a very real way. And it came from his stock brokerage days. He didn't know anything about it when he started at Merrill Lynch, and as he learned about the brokerage business, he just thought it was the most fascinating thing in the world, that you could actually own a piece of these large corporations like General Electric and Coca-Cola etc. And that just fascinated him so much. So in 1956, he took his brokerage exam, and he would be a stockbroker until he didn't enjoy it anymore, which was 1993, and he retired and moved to Bishop here, which showed a whole lot of stick-to-itiveness. It wasn't all rosy right from the start, but he was a man who didn't believe in giving up on anything very easily, and he didn't. And he taught me a couple of lessons that I've applied to my own business. As many of you know in the audience here, I'm a professional mountain guide. I take people climbing on peaks here in the Sierra, and I take people on trips all over the world. And I've done 120 expeditions to date, and been a very rewarding career, just as my father's was. And one of the things he taught me was that the importance of giving first impressions on people and making those good ones. And he learned that when he'd get a new client in, that first trade, whatever it was that he did, if that was successful, he said the next 10 trades could be busts, and they would still come back to him because they trusted him, they had that first trust. But if that first one didn't go so well, chances are he lost him as a client. And it's been the same in my business too. I get a client that comes, wants to climb a peak. If we can meet or exceed their expectations, chances are we've made a friend for life. If, on the other hand, they haven't had such a good experience with us, it takes a lot to get them back. And many times we don't see them come back at all. But it was a great lesson early on, and the way he got some of his first clients leads into something I'm going to foreshadow in a few minutes. But he owned a Model A Ford, and he had one his entire life. And in the early 50s, he got out of the war, and he was trying to cold call clients, and of course it wasn't getting him anywhere. And after a Friday afternoon, there were 3 of them in the office, and they said, okay, nobody's leaving until all of us get a new client. And he makes a phone call, and he gets this doctor who just rips into him and says, look, it's a Friday afternoon, I'm trying to get ready for a dinner party, and you've interrupted me. So he slams down the phone. He says, well, that didn't work so well. He got up in the morning and took a big long hike up Mount Baldy in Southern California, a mountain that figures prominently for our family and many of our friends. And he started thinking, I've got these stock guides. I'm going to pay some visits to some houses and just give them a stock guide. And so he had this Model A Ford. He drives up to these people's houses thinking these same guys planning dinner parties on a Friday night are now out on a Saturday afternoon mowing their lawn. And sure enough, he knocked on their door. Hi, I'm John Wedberg, and I just want to let you know I'm a stockbroker in the area, and I have this stock guide I'd like to give you. And if there's anything I can do to help you plan your financial future for you and your kids and your family, I'd like you to know that I'm here and can do that. And the genuineness of that, he got a group of clients that lasted his entire career. They started off as young single people. One of them happened to be a kid in college. He was a Japanese guy who was a member of an investment club at UCLA. There's 20 of these Japanese guys. They're all friends together. And he got one, he ended up getting all 20. And these guys, they're young people, and then they eventually married, eventually had kids. The kids grew up, he helped them start college funds, and then those kids eventually needed help as well, and it just expanded out like that. And of course, when it comes to the mountains, we all know that he had a very deep appreciation for the mountains, which he etched on all of us. And it wasn't just the mountains themselves, they became a backdrop for our life. And he learned that appreciation at a very young age. His father, he was an insurance agent at AAA from 1927 to 1965. He had 2 weeks off every summer, and they would all load up the car from LA and drive up to the west side of the Sierra to Huntington Lake. And they would spend that time for 2 weeks fishing, camping, hiking, exploring, adventuring, learning this appreciation from wilderness at a very early age. And one quote that he used to use sometimes in his slideshows I'd watch him give is, us collectively as a country, we are neither rich enough that we can afford to rate our wilderness, nor are we poor enough that we need to. And he attributed that quote to John Muir, actually, but it's one of his favorites. In 1960, he went to the Alps, and he hired a Swiss mountain guide And he hired him for 6 weeks. He did 28 climbs throughout the Italian, French, and Swiss Alps, including Mont Blanc in highest peak in Western Europe, and the iconic Matterhorn. He went rock climbing with him and skiing with him in the middle of summer in the Alps. And when we go on trips, he would talk a lot about these Swiss guides, and little did I know that was implanting in me what would eventually be my profession. He joined the Sierra Club in 1952, and he didn't just join the Sierra Club. Like everything, he dove in and really became active in it. He was chairman of the rock climbing section for 2 terms, the mountaineering committee, the ski mountaineers section for 2 terms. He was a trip leader for 35 years, doing rock climbing, ski mountaineering, and peak ascent trips. And going on those trips, of course, he was sharing his deep love of the outdoors. But there was really so much more that he instilled, not only on anybody who went on a trip with him, but to all of us as a family. That mountains are a place to strengthen your heart. And I don't mean your physical heart, I mean your inner heart. It's a place to invigorate your soul. It's a place to renew your strength and to clear your mind. It's a place to be healthy and get physical exercise, of course, but it's a great place to gain perspective on your life. Whether that's, whatever it is might be going on in your life, the mountains are always the same. You can go up to them and you sort of remove yourself from that and be able to look at your life from the outside in, and there's something very, very powerful about doing that and be able to come back into your normal life with a new perspective on things. And it's also a place to give thanks to God, our Creator, and more on that in just a minute. But he instilled all of that with all of us in something that's been ingrained in all the kids growing up, and even to this day, certainly too. And anybody who was fortunate enough to have spent time with him on a trip in the mountains got to experience that. Well, the saying goes that behind every good man is a great woman. And in the early 60s, he met our mother, Patricia, and she was a secretary in his office. And their first date was a trip up to the Baldy ski hut. And a farm girl from Nebraska, she'd always also had a sense of adventure. She didn't stay where she was. She worked her way as a waitress out west, ended up in San Francisco first at the LA, and they met and got married. And since then, they shared many life adventures together, both in the mountains and life in general, raising a family, etc. And they taught us a lot, both of them, about many things, but at the top of the list has to be what they've taught us about love. They showed it in how they supported us as kids in supporting whatever it is we wanted to do, to be happy, and through the affection that they showed. They were very open with their affection. And that was a very reassuring thing, looking back at it as a young kid. Just seeing that open affection, knowing that they really did love each other. This wasn't an act they were putting on. And it really showed, it made a huge impression on all of us. It could have been just leaving a campsite we're in to go walk somewhere and they come back arm in arm. And that also taught us to love other people as well. He was also a pilot, and a lot of their adventures evolved around that, and it would be that way as a family growing up. We took many of our family vacations just hopping around states, and we have great pictures and movies of all of that. We'd fly out to Catalina Island, have lunch, and fly back. And they had a couple of great adventures that, and I could go on for hours, believe me, telling you these things, but I just got a couple quick ones to share. One of them was, while they were still dating, he says, well, you want to hop on the plane and fly back and visit your family in Nebraska? Well, there's no email, there's no cell phones, a long distance call was even that was a big deal back then. So unannounced, they hopped in a plane and they flew over the Rockies, down, and they fly over this little town, 100 people, Newport, Nebraska, and she says, well, yeah, that's our farmhouse right down there. We just landed on a dirt road, and some pickup truck comes along, recognizes her, and And boy, the celebration that ensued from that, and the picnics, and I can only imagine the stories that were shared about that. And that's been a family story for a long, long time. Another one, which almost caused us not to be sitting here today, they flew down to climb volcanoes in Mexico. And they hop in a Cessna 182, there's 3 of them, and they start flying down south of the border, and eventually they got to get gas. So they landed this little strip, and back then the airplanes, they could either take 80 octane or 100 octane gas. And of course 100 octane was more expensive. Now it's all 100, that's all they do. But back then you do both. And so this guy comes up, and my father says, "80," means 80 in Spanish. And, "Oh, señor, 100," means 100. And I said, "Oh, I'm not going to let this guy, charge me for more." So he stood his ground. 80, 80, 80. And finally, put his hands, ran down the tarmac, went behind a bush, pulled a fuel truck out, drove it next to the plane, filled up the tanks with gas, paid his money, and then he took off, and now he's flying about 15,000 feet down towards Mexico City over the jungles in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden the airplane starts sputtering. And all of a sudden it hit him in one instant exactly what that guy at the gas was trying to tell him, is that he's got 80 octane gas, but it's bad gas. It's got water in the gas. So thinking on his feet, he quickly banked the plane so all the gas and the water would separate from each other because the gas is in the wings. And when he felt like it had been sufficiently separated, he banked the plane back to level and switched over to the one tank. And they barely made it into Mexico City on fumes, and then he drained 3 gallons of water out of the gas tank. So they go climbing, they climb Popocatépetl, it's about 17,800 feet in Mexico. And then they come back to Mexico City, and he's watching the air traffic controller. He's got this little board like this. He uses, these are prop planes, and they're doing this, circling down and circling back out. United 295, descending to 14,000 feet. United 245, descending 14,000. This is American